He stood in the middle of a crowded Atlanta mall. The air smelled like food court grease and cheap perfume. He was just a little kid in baggy jeans, but people stared at him like he was royalty. Girls followed him past the shoe stores. He did not have a hit song yet. He did not even have a record deal. He just had a swagger that money cannot buy. It was the early 90s. The rap game was getting younger. Stars like LL Cool J got signed at 16. Foxy Brown was 14. But this boy was barely out of elementary school. He met his best friend in the first grade. They danced around the playground for fun. They had no idea a genius named Jermaine Dupri was watching them from the shadows. Here is the deal. Jermaine saw the crowd. He saw the magnetism. He asked them one simple question. That question changed hip-hop forever. It turned two regular kids into global icons. They flipped their clothes backward. The zipper faced the rear. The pockets faced the front. The world went crazy. They released Jump and Touch the Sky, but gravity pulls hardest on those who fly the highest. The heat in Atlanta hits you like a heavy blanket. It rises off the asphalt. It sticks to your skin. In August of 1978, a new sound entered this humid world. Kris Kelly took his first breath. He was small, but his presence was loud. He was born into a city that was finding its own voice. New York had the rhymes. Los Angeles had the gangsta attitude. But Atlanta had something else. It had soul, it had grit, and it had a rhythm that moved a little differently. Kris Kelly grew up soaking in this sound. His mother did not play nursery rhymes. She played the heavy hitters. The house shook with the boom bap of Run DMC, the smooth flows of Eric B., and Rakim filled the living room. The magic of Michael Jackson spun on the turntable. The music was not just background noise. It was a teacher. It was a father figure. It was a map to a bigger world. Music gets into your bones when you are that young. It shapes how you walk. It changes how you talk. Kris Kelly was a student of the beat before he could even do long division. But here is the deal. Talent is lonely without a partner. Even Michael Jordan needed Scottie Pippen. Kris met his other half in the first grade. His name was Chris Smith. They called him Daddy Mack. Kelly was Mack Daddy. It was like looking in a mirror. They had the same energy. They had the same drive. By the third grade, they were not just classmates. They were a group. Picture two little boys in an Atlanta schoolyard. They are not playing tag. They are not pushing swings. They are rapping. They are dancing. They are mimicking the moves they saw on television. Other kids laughed. Teachers told them to sit down, but the hunger was already there. They performed for anyone who would look. They turned the cafeteria into a concert hall. They turned the street corner into a stage. They were underdogs in a game meant for grown men. The rap world in the early 90s was tough. It was hard. It was full of gold chains and angry lyrics. Teenagers like LL Cool J had cracked the door open. Foxy Brown kicked it down at 14. But these two were just children. They were barely tall enough to ride the roller coaster. They did not have money. They did not have connections. They just had the mall. The mall was the center of the universe. It smelled of fresh popcorn and new sneakers. It was loud. It was chaotic. It was the place to be seen. Kris and Kris spent their days there. They walked past the glass windows. They looked at clothes they could not buy. They soaked up the attention. People watched them. It was strange. They were just kids in jeans and t-shirts, but they walked with a purpose. They had a natural swagger. Girls whispered as they walked by. Older kids stopped and stared. They had the it factor, and they did not even have a song on the radio yet. Then came the day that changed everything. It was just a regular afternoon. The mall was packed. The air conditioner hummed against the Georgia heat. The boys saw something that stopped them in their tracks. It was a music group called Silk Times Leather. They were local stars. They had the look. Standing next to them was a young man with big glasses and a serious face. His name was Jermaine Dupri. Here is where the story twists. Most kids would be too scared to approach. Most kids would hide. But Kris and Kris were not most kids. They walked right up to the group. They asked for autographs. They just wanted a piece of paper signed by someone famous. But Jermaine Dupri was not looking at the paper. He was looking at the crowd. He saw the way people looked at these two little boys. He saw the magnetic field around them. It confused him. These kids were nobodies. They had no record deal. They had no music video. Yet, the crowd followed them like they were the kings of the food court. Jermaine had to know why. He leaned down. He looked Chris Kelly in the eye. He asked a simple question. What do you do to get these people's attention like this? The answer was pure gold. It was innocent. It was arrogant. It was perfect. We just cool like that. Jermaine Dupri was a genius. He saw the future in that sentence. He did not see two little boys. He saw dollar signs. He saw a global phenomenon. He asked them if they wanted to rap. He asked if they wanted to make a demo tape. They were 10 and 11 years old. They said yes. Jermaine became the architect. He was just a writer and producer then. He did not have a big record label. He was shopping their tape around town. He needed a hook. He needed something that would make people stop and stare, just like they did in the mall. The group needed a name. They started with Kris. It was simple. It was cute, but it wasn't a hit. Then Jermaine thought about it. Two kids, crossing paths, crossing over. Crisscross. But a name was not enough. They needed a look. The style at the time was baggy clothes. Everything was oversized. Jermaine looked at the jumpers the boys were wearing. A crazy idea popped into his head. Turn them around, he said. The boys looked at him. Put their pants on backward, put the shirt on backward. It sounded insane. It was uncomfortable. The zipper was in the back. The pockets were in the front. It made walking hard. It made sitting down even harder. But they trusted him. They put the clothes on backward. They walked back into the mall. The reaction was instant. Heads turned. Jaws dropped. People pointed. They laughed at first, but then they stopped laughing. They started looking, really looking. It was different. It was bold. It was a statement. Jermaine smiled. He knew he had lightning in a bottle. By 1992, he secured a deal with Rough House Columbia. They went into the studio. The beat dropped. The sample looped. Chris Kelly stepped up to the microphone. He channeled all that energy from his mother's living room. He poured all that swagger from the mall into the lyrics. They recorded a song called Jump. It was infectious. It was explosive. It climbed the charts like a rocket. It stayed at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 8 weeks. It sold over 2 million copies. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be like them. Kids in suburbs, kids in cities. They all turned their jeans around. They all wanted to be cool like that. But wait, it gets worse. Success is a bright light. It attracts everyone. It attracts fans. It attracts money. But it also attracts trouble. Rumors started to fly. People whispered that Treach from the group Naughty by Nature was angry. They said he felt Kross stole his style. They said he had a problem with Jermaine Dupri. The beef was simmering. The pressure was building. Chris Kelly was on top of the world. He was the Mack daddy. He had the fame. He had the fans. He had the backward genes. But he was still just a child living in a man's world. And the music business has a way of eating its young. The sun was shining bright on Atlanta, but storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. The higher you jump, the harder you hit the ground. And Chris Kelly was jumping higher than anyone else. The needle dropped on the vinyl. The horn blared. The beat kicked in like a mule. In 1992, you could not turn on a radio without hearing that sound. It was inescapable. It blasted from car windows in Brooklyn. It shook the trunks of Chevys in Los Angeles. It echoed through school hallways in Chicago. Jump was not just a song. It was an earthquake. Chris Kelly and Chris Smith were no longer just two kids from Atlanta. They were titans. The song stayed at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 8 weeks. Think about that for a second. For 2 solid months, nobody could touch them. Not Madonna, not Whitney Houston. 2 middle schoolers held the crown. They sold over 2 million copies of that single alone. The money rained down. It did not trickle. It poured. Here is the reality. The music industry had seen young stars before, but it had never seen anything this explosive. Kross did not just climb the charts. They hijacked the entire culture. Suddenly, the world looked different. Walk into any classroom in America in 1992. You would see it. Kids of all colors were wearing their clothes backward. It became a uniform. The zipper was in the back. The pockets were useless. It was hard to reach your wallet. It was hard to use the bathroom, but nobody cared. It was the ultimate symbol of cool. Teachers banned it. Parents shook their heads. They did not understand. But that was the point. It was a secret code for the youth. If your genes were backward, you were part of the movement. Kris Kelly was the general of this army. He stood on stage with his jersey reversed, and millions of kids followed his orders. Their debut album hit the shelves. It was called Totally Crossed Out. The title was perfect. The album flew off the shelves. It went multi-platinum. It proved they were not one-hit wonders. They followed up Jump with Warm It Up. The video showed them living the dream. They were young, black, and rich. They drove go-karts. They had jet skis. They showed the world that black joy was profitable. For the black community, this was a moment of pride. These were not kids acting like adults. They were not selling violence. They were selling fun. They were selling swagger. They showed that a kid from the South could dictate the style of the entire globe. But gravity pulls hardest on those who fly the highest, and Kross was about to fly higher than anyone. Picture this. The phone rings. It is not a promoter. It is not a radio station. It is the king of pop. Michael Jackson wanted them. He was the biggest star on the planet. He saw what Jermaine Dupri saw. He saw the magic. He invited Kross to join him on his Dangerous World Tour. This is the peak of the mountain. Kris Kelly went from the food court in Atlanta to stadiums in Europe. He performed for huge crowds. One night, he was doing homework. The next night, he was opening for Michael Jackson in front of 100,000 screaming fans. They appeared in Michael Jackson's video for Jam. They played basketball with the legend. They were peers. They stood shoulder to shoulder with greatness. The lifestyle was dizzying. Most kids their age were asking for an allowance. Kris Kelly was buying houses. He bought cars he was not old enough to drive. He filled his home with arcade games. He lived inside a fantasy. He was the breadwinner for his family before he could even shave. Jermaine Dupri had turned his vision into an empire. The genius producer had struck gold. He took the rawness of the street and polished it for the suburbs. He crafted a sound that was hard enough for the hood but catchy enough for the pop charts. The duo was everywhere. You could not escape their faces. They had a video game on the Sega CD. They had cameos on television shows like A Different World and In Living Color. They were the faces of Sprite commercials. They were kings. But success at that age is a drug. It feels like it will last forever. You think the screaming fans will always be there. You think the phone will never stop ringing. You think you will stay young and cute forever. Kris Kelly soaked it all in. He was the Mack Daddy. He had the attitude. He was the rougher edge of the group. He wore the fame like a loose jacket. He enjoyed the attention. He enjoyed the respect. For a brief moment in time, everything was perfect. The sun was shining directly on them. They were on top of the charts. They were on top of the fashion world. They were standing next to Michael Jackson. But biology is a cruel mistress. Time does not stop for anyone, not even for the Mack Daddy. While the world saw a smile, the shadows were growing. The boys were growing up. Their voices were changing. The cute cheeks were thinning out. The backward clothes were starting to look like a costume instead of a style. The public is fickle. They love a novelty, but novelties fade. The same people who cheered for Jump were getting ready to turn the dial. The music industry is a machine. It chews up talent and spits out the bones. It is always looking for the next big thing. Kris Kelly was standing on the summit. The view was beautiful. The air was thin. But the path down is always steeper than the path up. The silence was waiting for him, and that silence would be louder than the applause. Biology is the one enemy you cannot fight. You can fight the critics, you can fight the record labels, you can even fight the haters, but you cannot fight nature. Here's the deal. In 1993, the magic started to fade. It did not happen all at once. It happened slowly, like a tire leaking air. The boys were growing up. The squeaky voices that made Jump so catchy began to crack. Their throats got deeper. Their shoulders got broader. They were teenagers now. They went back into the studio to record their second album, Demise. The title was meant to be tough. They posed on the cover in a grimy alleyway. They tried to look hard. They tried to grow up with their audience. The album went platinum. It sold 1 million copies. For most artists, 1 million copies is a dream. But for Kross, it was a warning. Their first album sold 4 million. The audience was shrinking. The fever was breaking. The world of hip-hop was changing fast. The fun, party vibe of 1992 was gone. A new sound was taking over. Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg released The Chronic. The music became slower. It became darker. It was about lowriders and gang life in Los Angeles. Suddenly, two kids with their clothes on backward did not look cool anymore. They looked like a gimmick. By 1996, the writing was on the wall. They released Young, Rich, and Dangerous. The sales dropped again. The phone stopped ringing as often. The screaming girls moved on to the next big thing. The backward jeans stayed in the closet. The boys started wearing their clothes the right way around. It was a symbol. The magic trick was over. The curtain had fallen. Kris Kelly was still young. He was barely an adult. But in the music business, he was already an old man. He had lived a whole lifetime before he could legally drink a beer. The group split up. Chris Smith, the daddy Mack, wanted to try new things. He wanted to learn about business. He wanted to find himself outside of the spotlight. But Kris Kelly, the Mack daddy, struggled. The silence of an empty room is loud when you are used to the roar of a stadium. He had money. He had a big house in Atlanta. But he did not have the purpose he used to have. Then his body betrayed him again. He started losing his hair. Patches of his scalp became bare. It was a condition called alopecia. For a young man who was once a fashion icon, this was a heavy blow. He was the trendsetter. He was the one everyone looked at. Now, he felt like he had to hide. Rumors started to fly. People are cruel. They whispered that he had cancer. They whispered that he was dying. He wasn't dying. He just lost his hair. But the whispers hurt. He stopped going out as much. When cameras caught him, he was always wearing a hat. He pulled the brim down low. He tried to disappear. Pain needs a place to go. If you do not let it out, it eats you from the inside. Kris Kelly found a way to numb the pain. He turned to drugs. It started small, just something to take the edge off, just something to make the quiet nights go by faster. But drugs are a trap. They promise you peace, but they sell you slavery. He started using a mixture of cocaine and heroin. On the streets, they call it a speedball. It is a dangerous game. It creates a high that feels like flying, but the crash is devastating. Years went by. The 90s turned into the 2000s. The world moved on. New stars rose. Jay-Z, Eminem, 50 Cent. The name Kross became a trivia question. It became a memory of a simpler time. Kris Kelly lived in his big house. He was surrounded by his platinum plaques. He was surrounded by photos of him with Michael Jackson, but the house was full of ghosts. He was trapped in the past. The drugs became his best friends. They did not judge him. They did not care if his album sold or flopped. But wait, there was one last spark. In February of 2013, the phone rang. It was Jermaine Dupri. He was celebrating the 20th anniversary of his label, So Def. He wanted the boys back together. He wanted one last show. Kris Kelly said yes. He walked onto the stage in Atlanta. The crowd roared. For a few minutes, it was 1992 again. He wore the backward pants. He held the microphone. He rapped the lyrics to Jump. The energy was there. The love was there. But if you looked closely, you could see the truth. He looked frail. He looked tired. The years had been hard on him. He was sweating. He was fighting to keep up. The show ended. The lights went down. The applause faded. He went back home. He went back to the silence. Here is the tragedy. Everyone thought this was a comeback. They thought this was a new beginning, but it was actually a goodbye. On May 1st, 2013, the sun rose over Atlanta. It was a beautiful spring day, but inside Kris Kelly's home, something was wrong. His mother called him. He did not answer. Paramedics rushed to the scene. They found the Mack Daddy unresponsive. The house was quiet. There was no music playing. There were no fans screaming. There was just the cold reality of addiction. They tried to save him. They rushed him to the hospital, but it was too late. The official report came back. It was an overdose. The mixture of drugs had stopped his heart. He was 34 years old. The news hit the internet like a bomb. People could not believe it. They remembered the little boy in the mall. They remembered the joy. They remembered the dancing. They did not want to think about the pain. They did not want to think about the lonely nights. Kris Kelly touched the sky. He jumped higher than anyone. But the world is a heavy place. It pulls you down. He gave us the soundtrack of our youth, but he paid for it with his life. The music stopped. The legacy remained, but the boy who lived backward was gone. The news broke on a Wednesday. It moved faster than any song ever could. It traveled through fiber optic cables and lit up smartphone screens across America. Kris Kelly is dead. People paused. They stood in grocery lines and sat in office chairs. They looked at their phones in disbelief. For a generation of people in their 30s and 40s, a piece of their childhood died that afternoon. The internet flooded with pictures. But they were not pictures of the 34-year-old man who had struggled in silence. They were pictures of a 12-year-old boy. They showed him smiling. They showed him flying through the air in the jump video. They showed him with his jeans backward. Here is the hard truth. The world loved the memory of Kris Kelly, but the world had forgotten the human being. When the news hit, the hypocrisy of fame showed its ugly face. People who had not thought about Kross in 20 years suddenly posted tributes. They wrote kind words on Facebook. They tweeted lyrics. Radio stations played Warm It Up for the first time in a decade. But where were they when the lights went out? Where were they when the hair loss started? Where were they when the drugs took hold? We cheer for the rise. We watch the fall. Then we mourn the tragedy. It is a cruel cycle. Jermaine Dupri was devastated. He was the architect. He built the castle, but he had to watch the king fall. He released a statement to the press. He said Kris was the life of the party. He said he was a star. But you could feel the pain between the lines. He had lost a son, but the most painful moment came from the other half. Chris Smith, the daddy Mack, lost more than a group member. He lost his brother. They were not related by blood, but they shared a soul. They shared a playground in the first grade. They shared a stage in front of Michael Jackson. Now, Smith had to walk alone. Critics looked back at the legacy. They finally gave Kross the respect they deserved. For years, people called them a gimmick. They said the backward clothes were silly. They said they were just cute kids. They dismissed them as a fad. But looking back, the experts saw something different. They saw pioneers. Kross proved that hip-hop could be young. They proved it could be fun without being soft. They paved the road for Bow Wow. They cleared the path for Lil Romeo. Every young rapper who got a deal before they could drive owes a debt to the Mack Daddy. But there's a darker lesson here. The music industry is a machine that runs on youth. It extracts the energy from children. It packages their charisma. It sells it for millions. Kris Kelly gave everything he had. He gave his childhood. He gave his image. He gave his privacy. In return, he got money. He got fame. But those things cannot fill the hole when the cheering stops. The autopsy told us how he died. It was a mixture of drugs. It was a speedball. But the real cause was much deeper. He died from the pressure of a life lived backward. Most people grow up, make mistakes, and then find success. Kris Kelly found success first. He reached the mountaintop before he finished middle school. He had to grow up while the whole world watched. He had to figure out who he was after he had already been an icon. Gravity pulls hardest on those who fly the highest. The video for Jump is still on YouTube. You can watch it right now. Millions of people still watch it every year. In the video, Kris Kelly is frozen in time. He is forever young. He is forever cool. He is forever jumping toward the sun. That is how we should remember him. Not as the man who fell, but as the boy who taught the world how to fly. The music fades out. The screen goes black. But the rhythm stays in your chest. Because real legends never truly die. They just cross over. The funeral is over. The flowers have wilted. But listen closely to the radio. Look at the fashion on the street. Kris Kelly is not really gone. Here is the deal. Before Kross, hip-hop was a grown man's game. It was serious. It was tough. It belonged to the streets of New York and the gangs of Los Angeles. Kris Kelly changed the rules. He showed the world that a kid could hold a microphone. He proved that a 12-year-old could command a stadium. He kicked the door open. Without the Mack Daddy, there is no Bow Wow. Without Kross, there is no Lil Romeo. He paved the road for every young black star who came after him. He showed the industry that youth was a superpower. And then there is the style. You cannot talk about the 90s without seeing that image. The oversized jersey, the backward jeans. It was more than a fashion statement. It was a flag. It told the world that Atlanta had something to say. It was a symbol of rebellion. It was a symbol of joy. Even today, 3 decades later, that image represents a golden era. But gravity pulls hardest on the heart. We watched him grow up. We watched him fly. And sadly, we watched him fall. His story is a warning. It reminds us that fame is a shiny object, but it is cold to the touch. The applause feels good, but it does not hug you back at night. Chris Kelly gave us his childhood. He sacrificed his privacy to make us dance. Picture this. Somewhere right now, a DJ is playing that record. The horn blasts, the beat drops, the floor shakes. People run to the dance floor. They throw their hands in the air. For 3 minutes, nobody cares about their bills. Nobody cares about their pain. They just jump. That is the real legacy. The pain is gone now. The drugs are gone. The loneliness is gone. Only the joy remains. Chris Kelly captured lightning in a bottle and gave it to the world. He left a mark that time cannot erase. Where were you the first time you heard that beat drop? Did you ever wear your clothes backward just to feel cool? Share your memories in the comments below. Let us keep his name alive. Some stories end without closure, but dignity doesn't need applause.